Thank you for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. Really appreciate everyone's time. Welcome to today's meeting on the Safer Consumer Products Program Background Workshop on candidate chemicals in children's products. First things first, if you like subtitles or if you need them for today's meeting, please click the Show Captions button at the toolbar in the bottom of your screen. You will see the CC icon, and that will bring up the caption options. Also, when you have a moment on your toolbar, please open the chat box, because periodically we will be providing links and information during today's meeting through the chat box for the audience to access or copy for later reference. I would ask that you please do not send chats. This function is reserved and limited to the panelists today. I do want to let folks know that we are recording today's workshop. We will be posting a copy of the video on DTSC's public website for viewing as soon as possible subsequent to the meeting. So for those folks that either would like to go back and review the meeting again or were not able to join and participate today, the video will be available on DTSC's public website. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Simpson. I'll be your facilitator today. I work in DTSC's Office of Environmental Equity in our public participation branch. Very pleased to be here with you all. We know that you could be anywhere, but you chose to be here. So we thank you for your presence and for your involvement and interest. And, really appreciate everyone taking the time to be involved. We can't do this without you. So today we'll be discussing the Safer Consumer Products Program's efforts to assess candidate chemicals in children's products up to this point. If you'd like to learn more about the program and their specific product regulation efforts, please see our priority product work plan for 2024 through 2026 at the Safer Consumer Products Program website. If you check the chat box, you will see the link for that priority product work plan, and you can access it for later reference. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to review the agenda today. We'll be starting with opening remarks from the Deputy Director of the Safer Consumer Products Program. And we'll then transition to an overview of the Safer Consumer Products Program process, followed by the primary part of today's presentation, an overview of preliminary findings from the screening research on children's products, phthalates, styrene, and formaldehyde. We'll follow that with the question and answer segment. And just a word on the Q&A segment, that is the audience's opportunity and time to pose questions for the panel to respond to today. After the Q&A segment, we will have a brief break, and we will then reconvene for the public comment session during today's meeting. And a word on the public comment session, the panel will not be responding to comments received, but the comments will be compiled, and we will be reviewing and considering them if any of these topics move forward to the rulemaking stage. And following the public comment session, we will receive closing remarks again from the Deputy Director of our Safer Consumer Products Program. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of ways to participate in today's workshop. When we reach the Q&A segment, you can participate via the Q&A box. If you click the icon on your toolbar, the box will open, and then you can type your question or comment into the box. I will be reading questions aloud in the order received for the team's response during the Q&A segment. I would ask that the audience please limit questions to one at a time. You can submit as many questions as you'd like, but please submit them one at a time so that we can respond to them in the most organized way possible. If you prefer to speak your question or comment on your own, you can utilize the raise hand function. If you click the icon on your toolbar, the hand will raise up and I will be calling on audience members in the order that the hands go up. And I will prompt you to unmute, and then you can state your question or comment for the panel to hear. If you do so, I would just please ask that you please clearly state your name and affiliation before making your comment. That really helps us in the transcript and as we review the meeting later in the process. And finally, if you are joining by phone and you want to speak your comment, please press *9 to raise your hand. Your hand will be visible on my screen, and I will select you and then prompt you to unmute. At that time, you press *6 to unmute and pose your comment. And today's slide presentation will soon be publicly available on the Safer Consumer Products Program Workshops and Event page. If you check the chat box, you will see that link. Thank you. Slide 4, please. Next slide. We are currently in the public comment period for this effort. As you see on the slide, there is a QR code and a link where audience members and commenters can leave comments for the effort. The public comment period began on October 17th, and it will run through January 2nd, 2025. The department just extended it by 30 days. So again, the public comment period runs through January 2nd, 2025. Please check the screen for the QR code and link. And you can also find a link to the comment period page in the chat box. And in addition to the public comment page, the screen also shows a QR code and a web link so that you can access the background document on candidate chemicals in children's products. That link will also be placed in the chat box for the audience to access at your leisure later. So, with that said, I'd like to now introduce our panelists. If I could ask our presenters to please turn their cameras on during the introductions. That way the audience can match faces and smiles with names. We appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'd like to start with our project manager for this effort. Please meet Dr. Kim Hazard. She's a senior environmental scientist with DTSC's Safer Consumer Products Program. Welcome, Dr. Hazard. Next, please meet Dr. Ann Cooper-Doherty. She's the lead of the Safer Consumer Products Program Chemical Evaluation Unit. Welcome, Dr. Ann Cooper. And last but not least, please meet Robin Christensen, Deputy Director of the Safer Consumer Products Program. Really pleased to be here with you all. Thank you to our presenters for your time. We really look forward to hearing from you today and receiving all the great information. Really appreciate your dedication and time for being here as well. And with that said, please welcome Deputy Director Robin Christensen. Please join me in welcoming her into the space for opening remarks on the purpose and importance of this effort. Robin?
Thank you so much, Marcus. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our virtual public workshop on candidate chemicals in children's products. My name is Robin Christensen, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Safer Consumer Products Program, also known as SCP. I'm thrilled to see so many participants here today. I really want to thank you for joining us in this critical public engagement process. As part of this process, we shared our preliminary research findings on children's products when we released a background document in October. SCP has had an interest in safer products for children since the very start of our program. Our first priority product listing was children's foam padded sleeping products with the flame retardants TDCPP or TCEP. and we have since confirmed that manufacturers have stopped adding those flame retardants to their products. And today, our work continues to focus on efforts to protect children's health. Children under the age of 12, especially infants and toddlers, may be more susceptible than adults to the adverse impacts from exposures to hazardous chemicals. Childhood is a critical period for development, so exposure to environmental contaminants can have adverse consequences continuing later into life. The product category of children's products was included in the 2021 to 2023 Priority Product Work Plan, and it was expanded in the current work plan from 2024 to 2026 to include products such as textiles and furniture. Today, you will hear more about our high-level review of chemicals in children's products to determine which products and candidate chemicals to prioritize for additional research. We will also discuss the next steps in our process and how you can get involved. Your input is important to us as we refine our research and potentially propose one or more of the candidate chemicals in children's products as a priority product under the SCP regulations. I want to thank you again for joining us at today's virtual public workshop. We look forward to hearing your comments after all the presentations, and we really can't do our work without your input. So now I'd like to turn it over to Ann Cooper-Doherty.
Thanks so much, Robin. So I wanted to provide just a quick overview to everyone about how the Safer Consumer Products, or you'll hear us refer to it as SCP, how our framework works, as well as our prioritization process and how we select priority products. Next slide. So if you really kind of boil everything down, it's essentially a 4-step process. So to begin with, we have what we call our candidate chemicals list. This is essentially the menu of chemicals that we can potentially regulate. And this is populated by chemicals that have been identified as potential concern by certain authoritative bodies or even by DTSC. So once we've got that menu of chemicals that we're looking at, we then evaluate them in step 2 in the context of the products that they're used in. So at this point, we're researching product chemical combinations and prioritizing those that may cause harm. And this is all based on our prioritization principles, which I'll go over in the next slide. And for product chemical combinations that we do prioritize based on this potential to cause harm, we then initiate the rulemaking process to officially list them as what we call priority products. Once they've been officially designated as priority products through the rulemaking process, we go to the 3rd step, the alternatives analysis step. In the alternatives analysis step, this is a manufacturer-led evaluation of alternatives where they're looking at alternatives to the chemical of concern that we've identified in step 2. This is a really lengthy, in-depth evaluation. It uses life cycle thinking to assess alternatives and hopefully avoid regrettable substitutes to that chemical that we've identified. Manufacturers then submit the report that they've put together on this alternatives analysis to DTSC. It is made public. We evaluate that report, and based on the what's included in that report, we have a wide range of possible actions in this 4th step, our regulatory response, that we can employ to protect human health and the environment as needed based on what we see in that alternatives analysis report. And then, all throughout these 3rd and 4th steps, after the rulemaking has become effective, compliance and enforcement is in play as well. Next slide, please. And then wanted to also emphasize a little bit about our prioritization principles because it's different than a lot of other regulatory agencies. So in our screening process, which is what you're hearing a lot about today, what we're doing is we're focusing on evaluating product chemical combinations to see where there is potential for exposures to a candidate chemical in the product and the potential for one or more of those exposures to contribute to or cause significant or widespread adverse impacts. And the key here is really that word potential, and that's all that we really need to meet our regulatory burden in moving forward to listing product chemical combinations as a priority product. And as I mentioned, that's different than a lot of other regulatory agencies. Next step, please. So a little bit more about the specifics of that second step, which is where we are in that product chemical prioritization process. So it is, multifaceted, and we're really at the beginning of it here. So we do that screening where we are evaluating the prioritization principles. We're conducting screening, and then we have this public engagement process, which is what we're doing now, where we're really seeking your feedback, as Robin mentioned. We'll take that feedback, we'll consider it, and then as appropriate, move forward to researching and writing what we call our profile. And that's really our technical document that underlies the scientific basis for any rulemakings that we may pursue for a specific priority product. Once we've written a profile, if any, then we will move forward and, as appropriate, proposing a priority product and holding pre-rulemaking workshops, which is another opportunity for public feedback. We'll take that feedback, refine the profile, and go through the external scientific peer review. And then the final step in this process for any product chemical combinations that get to the end is initiating rulemaking. And the rulemaking process has yet another opportunity for public feedback. So you'll see it's a kind of whittling process down of starting with a large topic and narrowing it down to specific product chemical combinations that we eventually move forward as specific priority products. And there's plenty of opportunity for public engagement and feedback, and we really welcome it. So with that, I will ask for the next slide and turn it over to Dr. Kim Hazard to present on the team's screening work. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan Cooper. Thanks everyone for being here. I will go ahead and share findings from our preliminary research on chemicals in children's products with a focus on phthalates, styrene, and formaldehyde. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we care about children's products because we know that children are more vulnerable to chemical exposures due to a combination of their exposure-prone behavior and physiology, and their still developing bodies. Children have higher overall exposures because they eat, drink, and breathe more per unit of body weight than adults do. So there's overall greater exposure to any contaminants present in their food, water, and air. Children also learn by exploring and interacting with their environment. And if you've ever spent time around young children, I'm sure you are aware that they are constantly putting everything in their mouth. And so while it is developmentally appropriate, their frequent hand-to-mouth activity and time spent crawling on floors also increases their exposure to chemicals. Young children also spend a significant amount of time indoors where contaminants can settle in indoor dust, and the levels of indoor air pollution can be 2 to 5 times higher than outdoor levels. But not only do they have higher exposures, there's a greater potential for these exposures to result in lifelong health impacts because their brain and systems are still developing, and they're less able to break down and remove toxic chemicals from their bodies. Or put simply, children are not little adults, and so we really do need to take a precautionary approach to thinking about exposures from consumer products. Next slide, please. So when children's products were added to our priority product work plan, SCP was challenged with the question of where to start in this incredibly broad product category. So SCP conducted a high-level analysis of chemicals in children's products using data reported to the High Priority Chemical Data System, or HPCDS, paired with a systematic literature review. This initial analysis found the presence of approximately 200 candidate chemicals across over 280 product types, such as action figures. But then they set prioritization criteria based on the prevalence in products, the extent of the available research, and the severity of hazard traits. So the project team identified 3 chemicals and chemical classes as high priority for further research, being phthalates, styrene, and formaldehyde. And this prioritization aligned with another study that also used HPCDS data to rank chemicals based on exposure and toxicity as well. And so this has been the focus of our children's products team over the past year or so. Next slide. For this preliminary research phase, we cast a pretty wide net for any relevant research related to phthalates, styrene, or formaldehyde in any consumer product intended for use by children, which we generally consider under age 12. And this included, but was not limited to, these products shown here, including toys and games, cosmetics and personal care products, children's jewelry, clothing and footwear, and costumes. Any product designed or intended to help with sucking or teething or sleep or relaxation or feeding, furniture, food contact articles, and child safety seats and equipment. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and go through, previous slide, please. Each of our main chemicals one by one. First up is the chemical class of phthalates. Phthalates are a group of chemicals used in hundreds of children's products, as you can see by the wide variety of product categories listed here. They're most commonly used as a plasticizer to produce polyvinyl chloride or PVC, but they're also used in the production of other plastics, as well as solvents or fragrance carriers in cosmetics and personal care products. The HPCDS data suggests that orthophthalates most often serve as plasticizers in children's products, which makes these products flexible and bendable. When used as plasticizers, however, phthalates are not bound to the polymers and can migrate out of products across all stages of the product life cycle. And this results in multiple routes of exposure, including dermal, ingestion, and inhalation. And as mentioned, children are highly exposed through direct contact, mouthing, and environmental exposures such as indoor dust. Due to the high production volume and widespread use of phthalates, they are ubiquitously present in air, soil, water, and food, resulting in sort of this perpetual exposure from multiple sources. And biomonitoring data of phthalate metabolites has really backed this up, demonstrating widespread exposure to phthalates across the US population. This exposure is of particular concern for children because of the hazard traits of endocrine toxicity, developmental toxicity, and reproductive toxicity. Multiple studies have shown phthalates to be endocrine disruptors with the potential for adverse effects on reproduction and development in animals and humans. Our candidate chemicals list, our universe of chemicals, includes orthophthalates as a structural class as defined by California Biomonitoring Program, some individual orthophthalates, as well as a couple of non-orthophthalates. And within the broad class of phthalates, orthophthalates are by far the most used, researched, and regulated. And overall, it is unclear if the sort of well-defined hazard traits of these most studied phthalates extend to more data-poor phthalates within this broader class. And we understand, based on our research, that the use of other subclasses of phthalates is increasing, which presents the potential for regrettable substitution. Current regulations address a fairly small number of well-studied phthalates in a subset of children's products and cosmetics. Next slide. So DTSC is asking interested parties to address the questions listed in our background document. Written comments can be submitted through our online information system, CalSafer. Or you may make comments today during the oral comment portion of today's webinar, but I will highlight a few key areas for your consideration. So for phthalates, as I've mentioned, we considered phthalates as a broad class, including orthophthalates, isophthalates, and tetraphthalates for our preliminary research. And we just kind of want to better understand, how do these plasticizers get selected by manufacturers? Our preliminary research identifies some alternatives for phthalates, and we know that there are sort of different restrictions on different chemicals by age group, and we just kind of want to better understand how are these selected. And when are alternatives not feasible? And we want to better understand the overall trends in the use of isophthalates and tetraphthalates, particularly as alternatives to orthophthalates in children's products. And we are interested in any evidence of shared hazard traits among the broad class of phthalates or among any of the subclasses. Next slide. The next up is styrene. Styrene is a chemical building block used to make other polymers. Common styrene-based polymers used in children's products include polystyrene, which is what most people think when they think of styrene as styrofoam. This can be used in items like bike helmets and safety seats. Another polymer is acrylonitrile butadiene styrene, or ABS, which is used to make building bricks such as Legos or other children's products. Styrene has been reported as used in multiple components of a single product, such as both the hard and soft parts of teethers. Styrene emissions have been linked to toys, arts and craft materials, sleeping equipment, and other consumer products made from these styrene-based polymers. And while ABS is often touted as a safe plastic in toys, significant levels of residual styrene have been detected in toys and other consumer products made of ABS. Styrene has been detected at low levels in the air at daycare facilities, suggesting potential consumer product sources. Overall, there is widespread exposure to styrene in the general population from multiple different sources. But of concern, styrene concentrations in infants' blood has been found to be nearly double that of young adults. And this is of concern because styrene is a volatile organic compound, a neurotoxicant, and considered a probable carcinogen based on predominantly occupational studies. However, in our research, we found pretty limited research looking at more chronic low-level exposures to styrene and implications for children's health. Nearly all styrene regulation has focused on polystyrene. And we were expecting to see some information about things like safety helmets and car seats for exposures as related to children's products, but there's pretty limited data there. Next slide, please. So again, highlighting some key areas for your consideration for public comment. We are looking to better understand chronic low-level exposures to styrene and children's health. And since the main exposure of concern here is through residual contamination, we really want to better understand the drivers of contamination, the methods to minimize residuals, and the potential for release after incorporation into articles. So what methods might be used to minimize the presence of residual monomeric styrene in products made of these styrene-based copolymers? Next slide. And lastly, we have formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a chemical known for causing adverse health effects. Formaldehyde can cause irritation of the skin, eyes, nose, and throat, and is a known human carcinogen. It's our understanding that due to its high toxicity, formaldehyde is rarely used as an intentional ingredient in children's products. However, it is a common precursor for compounds and materials used in children's products, such as resins, adhesives, plastics, and solvents. These materials may contain residual formaldehyde as a contaminant. Due to its high volatility, formaldehyde can off-gas from products during and after use. And the primary way that people are exposed to formaldehyde is by breathing in air containing that off-gassed formaldehyde. Indoor air quality assessments of children's environments, such as postnatal care centers, childcare programs, and elementary schools, suggest that children's exposures to formaldehyde are widespread. In fact, an exposure assessment in California childcare centers found that formaldehyde levels in 87% of the facilities exceeded our state health protective guide levels. And California's emission standards actually predate that study. Existing regulations around formaldehyde in products mostly focuses on emission standards. For example, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, regulates formaldehyde emissions from composite wood products in California. Next slide. And again, since the main concern is the potential for exposure to contaminant, residual contamination, we are trying to better understand sort of indicators of intentional use versus contamination, the drivers of contamination, the methods to minimize residuals, and really trying to better understand the potential for formaldehyde monomers to be released after being incorporated into children's products, which products and materials are of greatest concern for exposure. Next slide. Overall, we've identified the potential for exposure to these three chemicals or classes in children's products to cause or contribute to adverse impacts. We know that children are uniquely exposed and uniquely vulnerable. And there's also the potential for aggregate exposure and cumulative effects, although data on this is generally lacking. To paraphrase Dr. Ruth Etzel and Rebecca Zubo, exposures to environmental contaminants during early life influence not only the health and well-being of that child, but also the adult that person becomes. And so in doing this external engagement, we are really trying to solicit more information before drafting product chemical profiles for these three chemicals or classes. Next slide. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much to the team that has worked on this. I have provided my contact information as well as the general contact information for the Safer Consumer Products email. And as a reminder, our public comment period is open until January 2nd of next year. And you can access that on CalSafer. So thank you again, and I will turn it over to Marcus for our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kim. And also thank you to Dr. Doherty as well as Deputy Christensen for the excellent information. Very interesting details, and it's very apparent that a good deal of analysis and thought has gone into the assessment. So really appreciate that. So for those that may have joined us a little bit late, we are now going to begin the question and answer segment. And I previously covered the ways to participate, and I will briefly review them. If you'd like for me to read your question aloud for the panel to respond, please click the Q&A icon and type your question into the box, and I will read them in the order received for the panel to respond. Again, I would ask if you could please submit one question at a time. That'll help us respond in the most organized way possible. If you prefer to speak your question aloud on your own, please click the raise hand button at the bottom of the screen, and I will call upon hands in the order that they're raised. I would ask you to please state your name and if you have an affiliation, organizational affiliation, before you make your comment or question. That would be much appreciated. If you are joining by phone, you will need to press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute when the time comes. So with that said, I see one question in the box so far, and it is from Brock Landry, and I will read this into the transcript. The EPA is currently in a proceeding under TSCA, TSCA, on formaldehyde. If a rule is promulgated, will DTSC's activity be preempted? So, thank you, Dr. Doherty.
Yeah, so on that, so we will always evaluate other state and federal requirements to assure that we're not duplicating or conflicting or running into any preemption territory. So we would evaluate that at the time that we move closer to the priority product listing point at that time.
Okay. Right. This time, there are no other questions in the Q&A box. And I do not yet, as of yet, see any hands up. Please don't be shy, folks. This is your chance to pose your question or thought and have a response from our panel. There was a comment made earlier in the meeting during the presentation, and I will read this out. It was from Scott Boito. And the comment is, all plasticizers are not bound to the PVC itself, but get inserted into the polymer matrix. This is not unique to phthalates. Thank you for that comment, Scott. And folks, press the Q&A box. You can type your question in. We may have folks doing so right now. If you'd like to speak aloud, please raise your hand by clicking the raise hand function. No hands up just yet. Thank you again for being here. Don't be shy, folks. Now's the time to ask your questions and have the panel respond today. Again, you can use the Q&A box. You can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand function. If you happen to be joining by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And I'm looking for people to call upon. We don't have any at this particular time. Why don't we give it another minute, just in case folks are typing questions into the Q&A box. Okay, we have a couple of entries into the Q&A box. I will read this for the panel. We have a question from Natasha Coplins. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Natasha. Are diapers covered under the product scope of children's products? Are diapers covered under the product scope of children's products? Thank you, Dr. Hazard.
Yeah, I do know that that was an area of interest in the high-level review that we looked at, and I invite Michael Ernst to chime in, who led that effort, the initial screening. But if I'm recalling correctly, it was not prioritized with everything that we went forward with.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. For this initial screening effort, our scope that we were looking at was basically any product intended for or marketed to children under 12. So diapers were included. That, to my knowledge, none of those chemicals that we talked about, we didn't find any of those in diapers. But there isn't any reason why we wouldn't look into them in the future if something came up that was brought to our attention.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, could you tell the audience the program that you're with?
Yes, sorry. My name is Michael Ernst. I'm the Market Research Supervisor for Safer Consumer Products.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you as well, Dr. Hazard. We have a couple more questions, so maybe, Dr. Hazard, if you could stay on screen. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. The question is, do you equate formaldehyde contamination with formaldehyde-releasing chemicals?
Sure, I can take that one. Thanks for that question. So just for context, a formaldehyde releaser is a chemical compound that slowly releases formaldehyde as it decomposes in a product formulation. Our project team did not include formaldehyde releasers in the scope of this preliminary screening research project to really help us kind of narrow our focus and to align with the HPCDS data that we were using. But we welcome folks with any information about formaldehyde releasers in children's products to please submit public comment. For example, we understand that there is potential concern about melamine food contact articles from some product testing that was done by our counterparts in Washington Ecology. And so we would welcome more information about that.
And thank you very much, Dr. Hazard. We have a question from Vanessa Forsyth. Question says, what about IV tubing and DEHP? My apologies, I'm not familiar with that acronym.
Sure, that I can take that one as well. That is a specific orthophthalate and as related to medical IV tubing. We do that did come up in our research as a exposure, but we did not really include that in the scope of products that were intended for use by children.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Hazard. Appreciate that. And we have a question from Vabhav Kulkarni. Question is, if safer alternatives to these proposed priority chemicals are unavailable, will DTSC utilize a currently unavoidable use determination, such as Maine will be using for PFAS?
Ann Cooper, do you want to field this one?
Yeah. So I think we have a different construct than Maine does. So in our construct, the manufacturer, the responsible entities, are the one that are conducting the alternatives analysis. So they're the ones that are looking at all the different options for alternatives and doing that kind of in-depth alternatives analysis that I talked about in our framework. They submit that report back to us, and that at that point they'll determine what alternatives may or may not make sense. And within the different types of alternatives analysis, there's a lot of different options depending on what they think may or may not work. And then we can go from there. So that gets into the more in detailed alternatives analysis process. And we can follow up with manufacturers and responsible entities on that as needed if we get closer to the priority product stage.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. Appreciate the information.
Marcus,
I see you there, Andre. Please introduce yourself to the audience and add what you have to.
So, hi, everybody. Andre Algassi. I lead the Chemical and Product Evaluation Branch. Just to the point of whether the use of one of these chemicals is unavoidable, as Ann Cooper correctly said, it's not our framework. However, the fact that there isn't currently an alternative could potentially be a factor in deciding to identify a priority product if we think that doing so might spur, R&D or things like that. And in fact, that could be a regulatory response. Or conversely, it could be a reason not to regulate something. So it is a consideration, but it's not part of our framework, as Ann Cooper said. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Question is, have you done any research about flame retardants in black plastic toys? Thank you.
We welcome any information that you have on that. The three groups of chemicals that we were looking at were, again, formaldehyde, styrene, and phthalate. But we definitely welcome any information on candidate chemicals in children's products.
Thanks again, Dr. Hazard. Appreciate it. We have another question from Elian Matha. What are the current and future regulatory trends regarding the use these chemicals in children's products? Are there any specific regulations or standards in place for these chemicals?
Yeah, there is a patchwork of regulations around, the use of these chemicals in products. Catlin, we could navigate to slide number 30, I think. So for cosmetics, all of these are being regulated under the California Toxic Free Cosmetics Act for intentionally added formaldehyde, certain phthalates, and styrene in the coming years. There are regulations both federally and at the state level on specific orthophthalates used in children's toys and other children's products. These combined really focus on 8 specific orthophthalates. And in California, 2 additional for products intended for children under age 3. Next slide. And so you can see for phthalates, there are sort of a patchwork of regulations related to specific phthalates and regulatory guidance values for specific phthalates under California's Prop 65. For styrene, really it's just in cosmetics where we found relevant restrictions. And then formaldehyde, as I mentioned, there's emission standards for composite wood products and restrictions on cosmetics, but for styrene and formaldehyde, not kind of the same level of regulatory action in children's products specifically. So I hope that's helpful and happy to chat more or share, these slides will be available as well.
Thank you again, Dr. Hazard. Appreciate that. Thank you for the question, Alien. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. 2 observations. 1, formaldehyde is naturally occurring. This has not been mentioned by DTSC. And 2, EPA's assessment on consumer uses of formaldehyde has medium confidence on the exposure potential, and the highest potential exposure for consumers was new homes. So not really a question there, more of a statement or a comment. I would also invite this attendee to, when we reach the public comment session, if you so choose, to resubmit this statement as a comment if you'd like as well. And thank you. I see Dr. Doherty has come on screen.
Yeah, I was just going to say about the SCP framework, we are a very precautionary based framework. So it is different than, like I said, other, I said in the overview, other regulatory frameworks. And another piece of our framework is we are meeting those prioritization principles. And so we don't necessarily have to go and find the number one source of a specific exposure. As long as there is potential for that exposure to be occurring, then we have met our regulatory requirements to potentially move forward. So, we certainly want to do something that's meaningful and significant, but it doesn't have to be the number one source of a specific chemical. Yeah, appreciate the input.
Thank you. Yep. Lighting more on that. Really appreciate that, Dr. Doherty. Well, right now, as we continue through the Q&A session, I'm still monitoring the box. We don't have any open questions at this time, but why don't we give it a few seconds longer? And nor do we have any hands from individuals that would like to state their own question. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for joining in and responding. Really appreciate that. And also, thank you to our attendees for the questions and the input and the dialogue. Makes my job as facilitator that much more interesting. I really get to learn a lot during these meetings and discussions too. Working in public participation, you know, we don't really always get to see the process and the assessment that goes into the chemicals and the products. So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Hazard, to Dr. Doherty, and Deputy Christensen for the information, because you know, individuals in other parts of our department learn a lot through these meetings. So we really appreciate that. And monitoring the Q&A box, I have one more question. Thank you, from Elian Matha. The question is, are you aware of any emerging technologies or materials that can help reduce or eliminate the use of these chemicals in, for example, outdoor wear products? Who would like to take Elian's question? Are you aware of any emerging technologies or materials that can help reduce or eliminate the use of these chemicals in, for example, outdoor wear products? You, Dr. Hazard?
Yeah, I am not aware kind of off the top of our head, but we, you know, as we move into considering the potential for a profile on these, we do look into potential alternatives. So we welcome any information that is out there, for example, in outdoor wear products for children.
Thank you, Dr. Hazard. So yeah, we look to the public to provide us information as well, right? That can help our analysis. So if there's information you can provide to the team, please feel free to share the contact details that were provided, or even to share during the public comment session. Thank you so much. And thank you for that question, Elian. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, you have mentioned ISO in tetraphthalates. Have you researched or determined if ISO tetraphthalates are hazardous to humans' health?
Yeah, so we did include ISO and terephthalate in our scope. However, on our candidate chemical list currently, we only have a couple of terephthalates and no isophthalates. I think I'm getting that correct. And so in order to further evaluate and move forward on those subclasses of phthalates, there would have to be an addition to our candidate chemical list. But we are, you know, I think we have some sense that there's the potential for similar hazard traits just based on the structural similarity to orthophthalates, that, you know, there is the potential for concern there. And we would really like to learn more and understand better, you know, potential shared hazard traits among these subclasses. So any information on that is welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent dialogue. Thank you again, Dr. Hazard. Appreciate that. And thank you for the attendee for that question. Do we have any further questions? We are at 10:25 and we have time for your questions, and this is the time. Thank you so much to the participants that have shared questions and shared thoughts. And also appreciate our panelists as well for the responses. Thank you. We've had a pretty good morning and a great dialogue so far. Let's keep it rolling. Are there any more questions? Right. No further questions at this current time. And just a quick reminder, folks, the next segment on our agenda is a brief break. And after that break, we will be reconvening for the public comment session. Thank you all for being here again. I know you probably are tired of hearing me say that, but I'm not tired of expressing it. I really appreciate everyone's presence. We would not be able to do this work without your involvement. And I also want to give big appreciation and thanks to the Safer Consumer Products Program for the dedication and the professionalism. Thank you so much for the work that you do on behalf of the consumers in this state and leading the way in so many other places as well. Still monitoring the Q&A box. No other questions are there. Why don't we give it just a brief second to see if anyone's typing? And thank you. We have a question from Vibhav Kulkarni. Thank you for the question. The question is, will DTSC publish the Q&A session? I can answer that question, Vibhav. In terms of publishing, if you mean make the video available, yes. This video will be available subsequently, and this session is being recorded. If you mean in written form, you may need to contact us and we may be able to provide that to you as well. But yes, the Q&A session will be published. It will be made available in a copy of this meeting, which is being recorded. A video copy will be placed on the department website. No open questions at this time. And let's give it just a few more seconds. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to type your questions, and we don't want to rush you in that process. I really appreciate folks' willingness to submit their questions and engage with us. Really appreciate that. We have another question that just came in from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, I'm wondering what compliance for formaldehyde looks like. Does the DTSC have a test method? So if one of our presenters can speak to potential test methods for formaldehyde compliance. Thank you, Dr. Doherty.
I think, one of the questions was about potential information around methods. And I think that's a question that we'll deal with, if and when we get to the point of listing priority products associated with formaldehyde. At this point, we're still in the early stages of screening.
Thank you for that.
I'll just
Andre.
add that we have analyzed consumer products for formaldehyde at our environmental chemistry lab. So we do, depending on the product, again, it's early days. There's nothing to enforce yet, but we have had some experience with formaldehyde.
Okay. So compliance for formaldehyde still in the early stages. Thank you for that question for our anonymous attendee. Encouraging more questions. We're still open in our Q&A segment. Now's the time to receive a response from the panel. A reminder, I've shared it before, but once we reach the public comment session, the panel will not be responding to comments received. We will be recording and compiling them and considering them in the future. In particular, if any of the topics proceed to a regulatory rulemaking stage. But the Q&A segment is your opportunity to hear back from the panel with a response to your question or your comment. And right now, the Q&A box is looking pretty quiet, pretty blank. No hands have gone up. Give it just a few more seconds, because every time we've reached this point, another question filters into the box, and I don't want to rush us back past this to break. So give it just a couple more seconds. It's been a great morning so far. Really appreciate everyone for being here and helping to make this a wonderful morning. We have another question that has come in from Vabhav Kulkarni. Thank you for the question. The question is, if manufacturers substitute with an alternative, are they required to inform the DTSC on the substitution or provide a hazard assessment for the alternate chemical? So we'll get an answer to that. Thank you, Vibhav. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly or close. Thank you, Andre.
Depends on the timing, assuming our regulations are in effect. It depends on, so if the alternative is a candidate chemical, they do an alternatives analysis. They could do a product removal or product replacement notification and provide some information if it's not a candidate chemical. So the short answer is yes, they are required to inform us, and hazard assessment if it is another candidate chemical.
Thank you for the clear answer, Andre. Really appreciate that. Thank you for the question again. Very good session, folks. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Either folks that would like to state the question or would like to pose it in the Q&A box for me to read. If you're tired of hearing my voice, please raise your hand up. Thank you for the question. We have one that came in from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, what if the manufacturers do not choose the materials used? How is that assessed? Good question. Thank you. What if the manufacturers do not choose the materials used? How is that assessed?
I think, when we get closer, even when we get closer to the point of having specific priority products and manufacturers have questions, we have had these circumstances come up where the responsible entity, there's complications in the supply chain. We know those can certainly have lots of players. We encourage folks to reach out to us if they have questions related to compliance with multiple folks involved. So you can reach out to us with these specific questions and we can certainly help you. But just a reminder, like I said, we are still in the screening phase and a ways away from the point at which folks would be needing to submit and comply. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doherty. Appreciate that. And another question from our anonymous attendee. Could that question be clarified, please? Are they considered a manufacturer or just a reseller other at that point? And I'm not sure how we would address that or clarify the question, but I'll read that one more time. And it seems like Andre may have a response. Could that question be clarified? Are they considered a manufacturer or just a reseller / other at that point?
So there's a definition of manufacturer in our regulations. And so keep in mind, we're not regulating anything right now. This is, we have a background document and we're sort of in the early stages. So there's nothing really, there's no specific product. So, but it's possible that a person formulating something using a proprietary mixture or something could be considered the manufacturer. It really depends, and it's too early to say at this point.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you for the question. And another question from our anonymous attendee. For example, purchased parts, example is electronics, are not made by children's product manufacturers. They are open market components only. Thank you for adding to the question. Really appreciate that from our anonymous attendee.
And this was a follow-up on the previous, and so I think just to clarify, and the answer is it really depends. It's early days right now, but possibly.
Thank you. Very early in the process. Thank you so much, Andre. Appreciate you. Great dialogue, everyone. Really learning a lot today. Not only learning a lot from our internal panelists and presenters and presentation, but also learning a lot from our attendees and these phenomenal questions. We're still in our question and answer session. We have time for your questions, time for your thoughts. No more open questions right now. But why don't we linger in this space just a little bit longer? Let's leave just a little bit of time in case people are typing into the box. We've had a good deal of questions and a good deal of answers and responses so far. There's no need to stop them. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. No hands have gone up. Again, just a reminder, if you are joining by phone, you will need to press *9 to raise your hand. On our attendee list, I don't see anyone that's joining by phone, or at least it doesn't appear as that's the case. And don't forget, please, you can type your question into the Q&A box. I don't know if we have any more questions to come, but let's give it just a few more seconds in case we have any last-minute questions or straggling questions. There are no bad questions. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to the folks that have asked questions and participated in this space. We really appreciate your involvement, appreciate your interest. And as our panel has stated on multiple occasions, we are at the very beginning of this process. There are other opportunities if these topics proceed to a regulatory rulemaking stage. But this is a good opportunity for ground floor information. We are exchanging information, providing it, taking comments, taking questions, considering it in our analysis going forward. I see no more questions coming in. Again, really appreciate everyone. The next stage in our agenda is our break. If there are no more questions or hands to be raised, I will move us toward our break. We're at 10:39 on the clock. Oh, you just got under the wire with that question. We have one more from our anonymous attendee. What focus is being considered for the size of manufacturer? For example, small manufacturing that may find alternative use cost prohibitive versus large manufacturers that could absorb cost challenges. What focus is being considered for the size of the manufacturer? Thank you, Dr. Doherty.
Our framework, we really focus on listing product chemical combinations and priority products. And so then at that point, anyone who's a responsible entity, which is defined in our regulations, which tends to start with the manufacturer, is subject to compliance at that point. So, we do consider who the manufacturers are in our rulemaking. And we do consider, the alternatives that may or may not be available, as Andre said. But we really are looking at it from the product chemical perspective when we're deciding which ones to pursue.
So not really based on the size or the magnitude of the manufacturer themselves then.
Right.
Understood.
Right.
Thank you. Right. Thank you so much. And thank you to our anonymous attendee for that good question. Again, any further questions, please feel free to raise your hand and speak the question. Um, I am happy to read it out loud for you to continue that process. We really love to hear from you, though. If you do, if you could state your name and your affiliation, or any affiliation that you may have, organizational or otherwise, we would appreciate that. "18 questions down. How many more do we have? Keep them coming, please." Really appreciate our panelists. Again, thank you for the phenomenal responses. We have a question from Vaibhav Kulkarni. Thank you. The question is, what is the time frame the DTSC is looking at for rulemaking? So maybe Dr. Doherty, I don't know if you'd like to take that. You had previously touched on the process.
I think, right now we're still in the screening phase and we're welcoming input. And then, assuming things move forward, it takes a while to put together profiles. And at that point, from a profile, once we've released a profile, we have a workshop on that. Like I said, that process takes a while. I don't know if Kim has more specifics on possible timeframes, but that's all very, nothing certain at this point. So I don't know that we could offer any concrete timeframes. Kim, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I was just going to encourage folks to keep an eye on our public timeline. We, update it quarterly, and you can find, the projected timeline for children's products up to date there. I can put a link in the chat.
Yeah, great point.
Drs. Doherty and Dr. Hazard, appreciate that. And just a reminder to our audience, we are in the public comment period for this effort. We are taking public comments, and the public comment period runs through January 2nd, 2025. It has been extended. We wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to provide comments through the holidays and make it through a busy holiday time and provide comments still. We have provided in the chat box the link to the webpage where comments can be submitted. And also, thank you, Dr. Hazard, for putting the SCP timeline link into the chat box. There's good information in the chat box, folks. If you haven't had the opportunity to open it up and scan through, please do. You may want to copy some of those links for later reference. The priority product work plan, workshops and events page, and a link to the background document for this effort. So please don't forget about those good resources in the chat. To our audience members who have submitted questions and in fact may still be typing and submitting them, thank you, and we appreciate you. We're at 10:45. We're breezing right through this Q&A session. Just a reminder, next up, we have a 5-minute break. And then we're going to reconvene for our public comment session. We will not be responding to public comments during that part of the meeting. We will be gathering the comments and they will be utilized and reviewed further down the process as things move along. As folks have said, we are very much in the beginning of the process. I have a hand up from Nadia Prather, or I had a hand up from Nadia Prather. Let's get there. Nadia, maybe you put your hand up by mistake or you changed your mind. If you change your mind again, please raise it up. We would love to hear from you, Nadia, or any other audience members. And now is the time. Don't be shy. All right. Well, really appreciate everyone's questions. Thank you again to our presenters and panelists for the answers. It's been a couple of minutes and no more open questions are in the Q&A box. No further hands have gone up. I think I'll take this opportunity to move us to our 5-minute break. And just a reminder, we will reconvene for the public comment session. When we reach that session, you can use the Q&A box or you can raise your hand and speak your comment on your own. And I invite you to do whatever you are most comfortable with. So we are at 10:47. I'd like to call us to a quick break. If we could plan to return back in 5 minutes, by my clock, that puts us at about 10:52, nearly 10:53. And thank you so much for updating the slide. I'm going to pause our recording, folks, and I will reinstitute it in 5 minutes. See you at 10:52. Thank you. Welcome back from break, everyone. It is 10:52. I have resumed our recording. And why don't we reconvene? We are transitioning now to the public comment session of today's workshop. And just a brief reminder, this is the opportunity for providing feedback that will be later considered and used as this effort, if and as the effort moves forward to regulatory rulemaking. The rules are much the same as they were for the Q&A session in terms of participating. You can leave your public comment via the Q&A box and I can read it for you, or you can raise your hand and speak the comment yourself. Whatever you are comfortable doing, please feel free. Thank you so much for updating the slide, Catlin. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like to submit a written comment on slide 25, actually, I'm sorry. Yes, slide 25, the link at the bottom of the slide is the Safer Consumer Products CalSafer website. You can leave comments there, or you can speak them today. Do we have anyone that would like to make a public comment? I know we had a good dialogue at the Q&A session, so maybe folks' questions and thoughts have been adequately addressed. We'll just give it a very brief moment. Just a reminder that our public comment period runs through January 2nd, 2025, so there still remains plenty of time to provide comments. Thank you so much. Well, to our panelists, I don't want to rush through the public comment session at all. And I want to leave adequate time and space for folks to speak or submit comments if they like. But at this point, we don't have any. So, but again, ample opportunity exists for our audience to submit comments via the website. Well, excellent job to our panel. Right now, doesn't look like we have any public commenters. So I want to say thank you, because if we don't have any public commenters, then I will move us to the final part of our agenda. And that would be closing remarks from Deputy Christensen. Really appreciate everyone's time today. And before I hand it over to Deputy Christensen, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your involvement and interest and your participation. So with that said, and appreciations expressed. Hope that you have a phenomenal and wonderful day. And I will turn it over to Robin Christensen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I also want to thank Dr. Kim Hazard, Dr. Ann Cooper Doherty, as well as the team that is working behind the scenes to keep this all going. That includes the team that worked to develop the background document on candidate chemicals and children's products, as well as the team who's put together the workshop today. I also want to thank our participants today and the questions that we've received. You have given us some good information to consider as we move forward. And I know that we have quite a few participants on this call today. We are counting on your engagement as we move forward. Given that we are approaching a few holidays, as Marcus mentioned, we do have that extended comment period open through January 2nd. That gives you over 44 days to provide any additional comments in the CalSafer portal. We really do welcome all perspectives, questions, and data and information that can help us to identify future priority product listings related to these candidate chemicals in children's products. And with that, I want to give one last thank you to the team and to Marcus, and just express my appreciation to everyone for being here today with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our audience. Have a wonderful day. And we appreciate you being here. Goodbye.